Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, all you porcupines, This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey, coming to you for episode 40 of the Porcupine Report. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We release a new episode every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m. on the social media pages for the Free State Project. That includes Facebook, X, YouTube, and also many of your favorite podcasting apps like Spotify and Apple. If you are not already liked or subscribed or, whatever works for whatever platform you like to consume your content on, be sure to go ahead and do that and share the show with your friends. We are always having every single week great news updates from the Free State Project and excellent free-range conversations with interesting people in and around the wider liberty movement, both in New Hampshire and around the country. And the guest we're going to have on today is going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that. But before we get to today's guest, I do want to mention two things. First of all, a great opportunity if you are in New Hampshire or not too far from New Hampshire this weekend, at the Shell Liberty Clubhouse in the Seacoast area, Friday and Saturday evening, we have a Robbie the Fire Bernstein. You may know him as the co-host on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem podcast. He's going to be here Friday and Saturday evening at the Shell doing his comedy show, which he tends to come up every this time of year and do a comedy show at the Shell. So it's happening again this Friday and Saturday. If you're in the area, you're not going to want to miss that. And I was also told by some of the folks who run the Shell that if you are a new mover to New Hampshire, participating in the Free State Project, they will give you a comped free ticket just as a welcome gift, just to say thank you for joining the cause of building a free society here in the state of New Hampshire. So that's not something to miss. Now, I'm not Friday. I'm going to be at the Quill for the New Movers Party that's going on. So I won't be there Friday night, but I am going to that comedy show to see Robbie the Fire Bernstein on Saturday. So if you come Saturday, maybe I will see you there. Great. It's going to be a great, fun event, fun times. Robbie the Fire is hilarious. And we always love to encourage Liberty influencers coming and visiting the Free State. How could they stay away, right? This is where it's all happening. And I also want to mention to you that as we are approaching the end of the year, it is fundraising season for many of your favorite nonprofits out there, including the Free State Project. Now, I know everyone is focused on what happens on November 5th. That's what everyone's talking about. What's going to happen in the elections? Who's going to be the president? What are we going to see in the state house and all of that? Who's going to be the governor in New Hampshire? All these things are going to be decided on November 5th. There's a lot of great organizations working on those immediate short-term efforts, making liberty win each election cycle. But of course, the Free State Project is focused on what happens on November 6th and the days after, the weeks after, the years after, the generations after, as we work to build our free society here in the Live Free or Die state. And so we have an ambitious fundraising goal for the end of the year. We're trying to raise $180,000. And thankfully, we have one generous donor who pledged to do half of that in matching funds. He will match dollar for dollar everything we raise from now until the end of the year, up to $90,000, which would get us to our $180,000 goal. So if you've ever thought about contributing to the Free State Project and supporting our efforts to recruit new movers to the Free State, to build community here in New Hampshire, and to produce quality content like this program, then now is a great time. If you go to fsp.org and make a donation there, you will double your impact. Every dollar is worth two. So now's a great time between now and December 31st. Go make a donation, fsp.org. It really, really helps this show and all of our programs that we are putting on at the Free State Project. All right. Let's get into the rest of the show. Now, our guest for today is, well, his name is Andrew Heaton. If you don't know Andrew Heaton, you're really missing out. He is a prolific podcaster. Frankly, like, I keep thinking that I listen to all of Andrew Heaton's podcasts, but whenever I think I am listening to all of them, I discover that there's another one I didn't even know about. So we'll talk about some of his shows, but what we're really here to talk about today is his new book that he just released, which is called Tribalism is Dumb. Andrew sent me a copy to read, and I will say I cheated a little bit by also getting the audio book, which is read by Andrew Heaton himself, so which is very excellent. So whether you're a reader or a listener, Tribalism is Dumb is what we are talking about today, and there's a lot to talk about. So rather than me, pontificating more about it, let's talk with the man himself. Let's welcome to the show, Andrew Heaton.
Howdy.
Howdy, Andrew. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Eric, and thank you for the kind words about me in the book.
Well, I appreciate it, and I will say, I remember, I had you on my previous podcast when I was at Young Americans for Liberty, and we were both living in the Austin, Texas area. Now, times have changed. You've made the move to Washington, D.C. My condolences, by the way.
Thank you.
On moving to the Imperial City.
Well, I feel like I fixed everything in Texas. And there was no longer any reason for me to be there. So I picked up and have moved to Washington, D.C., and I figure over the next 2.5, 3 years, I'll probably fix everything here too. And then on to Belgium.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're on the case, Andrew. I will say that there's I think that your efforts on fixing things would be far more productive in New Hampshire, and you're always welcome to make the move and join us here.
What would I fix? What would there be there for me to do?
Well, at least there are some problems, but they are more fixable here. Because we've got the great human resources here in New Hampshire, Liberty people who are looking to build and fix things. But
I like this. Keep working on me, because I've been to New Hampshire twice and I've had a blast both times. I think it is a beautiful state. The flag should just be Yankee Narnia. It should just be a bunch of animals from C.S. Lewis in flannel with colonial houses in the background. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I've really had a good time every time I've been there. I've hung out with you, and I've hung out with people from the Free State Project, and with the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, and everybody's been super nice and inviting. And it's weird because everybody talks about how New Hampshire's this like very curmudgeonly, unfriendly place. But it's for people, I'm assuming most of the people that listen to your show are a part of the Free State Project, and then there's some people that are thinking about it. But for people that have just visited New Hampshire, that you guys do this weird thing where you'll go into a diner or a bar or something, and you'll sit down, and someone will be like, "Where are you from?" And you go, "Oh, I'm from Oklahoma," and they'll go, "Oh, I bet that's friendly, not like here." But a stranger will come talk to you for like 20, 30 minutes and like want to hear about your life and like give you advice. And then everybody will tell you how it's not a friendly place. And I'm like, how? Anyway, I like it. My experience has been quite the opposite.
Well, and of course, in the Free State Movement, we're extra friendly. We're extra, at least, for people who share our values. We want to welcome you and maybe, have you come visit, maybe decide to stay. But certainly we do have coming up next year the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which I think from our past conversations you've never been to before. Is that right?
No, I've only been in New Hampshire for the primaries. I've never been up there for any libertarian activities or maple festivals or whatever you people do. But I'm now on the East Coast, so I'm more likely to come up. I've got a camper and a dog, and I can. How long does it take to drive to DC up there? 12 hours?
Oh. I always fly when I need to go down to DC, and that's a very rare occasion.
You guys send me the Free State Project private plane, and I will hop on it, and I will come up there.
Well, we'll work something out. I think that you would, personally, I think you would love the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, and maybe even a talk about tribalism at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum from Andrew Heaton would be fascinating. We could maybe talk.
It does sound like kind of ground zero for me, because I find that my key demographic is dudes in flannel that shop at Home Depot that may or may not be into prepping. Like that tends to be like when someone's like, "Are you Andrew Heaton?" It's usually a bearded guy in flannel at Home Depot. So I feel like I'm describing a lot of the people in the Free State Project. That would, a lot of them are shaped like bathtubs. You're not shaped like a bathtub, Eric. You're in good shape.
Yeah, I do have a beard. I am wearing like an LL Bean flannel, and but I'm not at Home Depot right now. So
not at the moment. But in any event, that sounds like fun, and I think would be. I think would be relevant to your audience in that I find that libertarians tend to be very rational and very focused on ideas and systems, and tend to be less caught up in the weird kind of emotional rickety-rackety that surrounds stuff. And so me giving a talk on tribalism would actually be pretty good for explaining why people appear to be crazy when they don't enter the rationalist framework that we're used to.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it would be very well received. But I want to get back to the point I was about to make, which is I remember it was like 3 years ago now when you were on my last program, and we were talking about tribalism back then, and you told me that you were in the process of writing a book about tribalism. And Andrew, I will say over the last 3 years, I've thought about writing a book, but it's hey, you actually did it. So
thank you,
and it's a fascinating read. So
I'm very glad to hear that, because it's a hell of a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. So I'm really pleased that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, so let's hop in. So let's give us kind of the premise, right? Human beings are we're naturally wired for tribalism, right? Why is that?
We are. Well, I'll back up a little bit. The way that I got into this is really in 2016 when Trump won. I was in New York City, and at the time I was working at Fox Business on a show called The Independents, which was a libertarian program, and had not had any problems living in New York. People would go, "So you work at Fox?" And I'd go, "Yes, I love gay people." And as long as I stipulated that early on, no one really had a problem with me. They go, "So what is your thing?" And I'd be like, I probably believe most of the stuff you believe. I just think the government doesn't work very well. That's kind of it. That's the basic thing. And they'd go, "Oh, okay, so you're not a bigot?" And I'd go, "No, not a bit. I'd like have fun with your throuple dropping acid at Burning Man. I'm about as libertine as they come, despite the kind of Jimmy Stewart exterior." And we got along fine. And then Trump got elected. And there was this sea change that happened where a lot of people that had previously been totally fine with me went, "You were beyond the pale. You were unacceptable." And I would go, "But I've not changed anything. If anything, I've moderated my positions. I'm more towards the center than when a lot of these folks met me." And it freaked me out. Frankly, it made dating very difficult, because there was this kind of sense in New York City of you have to be I won't mention which team, but you have to be on a specific team or you're a center. And you can't participate. Then it kind of freaked me out. And at the same time, I was doing stand-up comedy in New York, and I knew that everybody related to death and sex. That's kind of known in humor theory, that anything that relieves psychic tension involving death and sex will result in laughter if it's done correctly. And the thing that surprised me was that that tribal identity, that need to be part of a tribe, that part of a community, is just as high in the human impulse scale as reproducing and avoiding death. And I became really fascinated by it, and more fascinated by it as our already pretty bad political landscape just descended into dumpster fire level buffoonery and stuff. And so I ended up writing this book, and the first third of the book is the evolutionary side of this. Where does this come from? Why are we wired to be like this? And so, circling back to your original question, Eric, we are wired to be tribalistic. We're wired to be in a tribe. We're a hyper-social species. We live in groups, and that was really boiled down into us for up 10 million years. I don't know, 200 million years. Like, you go through any level of primate that we're descended from, we've got this groupish tendency, which by and large is a good thing, because most of the time that's positive things like being a part of a church or a basketball team, or just taking care of your friends, stuff that we would all look on as very good. The stuff that's irritating, I find, is when it becomes this, I just really want to have an enemy to hate. I have to have some external menace that I'm going to go fight. And my theory that I outline in the book is, I think that it comes down to a kind of evolutionary resource competition that's built into us. It's not the circumstances today, but it's what we grew up with. So I document in the book, there's at least 2 instances that I'm aware of where we've got pretty solid scientific data that the human population bottlenecked, and that we were an endangered species at least twice in our evolutionary history. There was one period of history not that long ago with modern Homo sapiens like you and me, where the whole population of mankind was isolated to an area about the size of Rhode Island inside of Africa, but about as big as Rhode Island, with, I think it was like 20,000 people. And this was 8,000, 9,000 years where we were under incredible duress. And the reason that I think that's relevant is in a situation like that, where human beings were borderline starvation all of the time, if there was a field with fruit in it and two tribes came into it, the tribe that edged out the other group was probably going to survive. Now, today, fortunately, as you and your listeners know, wealth is not a zero-sum game. We don't live in the Middle Ages where if I become wealthy, it's because I screwed you over. We build wealth, and we live in this incredibly abundant society. But that's not the one that we developed in. I think for the same reason that people tend to have a visceral, intuitive sense that inequality is evil. That's a genetic compulsion left over from our past, where if you and I are hunting elk and I get more elk than you might die. And so we have that kind of innate, and I think people that study economics would go, well, that's not really the situation anymore. If we're expanding the pie, it doesn't really matter if you get a bigger piece of pie than I do, so long as we're both doing better overall. Very similar to that is this innate sense of I've got to protect my group, and I have to proactively go find another group to fight. It's not just that I love my group and another group wanders into my field and I got to ward them out. It's that we have built into us an evolutionary impulse to seek out an enemy tribe and best them. And you can see that on display all the time in human society, I think in healthy ways, like organized sports. We have this very competitive group dynamic that we like to get into, where I'm going to be on the Patriots. Yay, Patriots!
I'm not much of a sports ball guy myself, but it does seem like
I know
a lot of people like the Patriots.
I can't figure out your relationship with Massachusetts. I'm still trying to work out this dynamic, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people in your area that like the Patriots and like they hate the Yankees or whatever. That's fine. That's a very positive thing. But it is part of that vestigial impulse that we've got of we want to form coalitions and go fight another coalition. And one of the things that I've got in the book is this is not responsive, it's proactive. So in the same way that as a dude, I am not utterly sexually neutral until I am presented with some sort of outside stimulus. At some point, my brain goes, I'm horny, and I go looking for something, right? Or probably food is a better example of this. It's not that you're in a neutral state and then you smell the pie and you get hungry. That can happen. But it's that you get hungry and you go looking for pie. It's the same thing with enemies. It's the same thing with enemy tribes. And it's great if it's funneled into something proactive, like economic competition or sports. It's dumb when it becomes a political thing, where instead of barreling or drilling down to first principles and how society ought to operate and values and ideology and policy, it just turns into blue team versus red team stuff. And I think a lot of the idiocy that we're dealing with today in our country is this blue team versus red team stuff, as opposed to the actual mechanics that we ought to be talking about.
You know, I know on social media, as I've been reading your book and and thinking out loud about some of these ideas, I've gotten a few reactions from some people who, that kind of resent the implication that we are naturally tribal and argue that we need to be transcending our tribal nature. And I guess it sounds nice in some regard, but I guess I wonder if we are trying to live better lives and not be stupidly tribal, do you think it's can we I guess engineer society to make people not tribal, or should we be more trying to take our natural tribal human nature into account as we are building the structures of society?
More the latter. I don't think you're ever going to be able to inoculate yourself to tribalism, in the same sense that we're never. I don't think that you'd even want to inoculate yourself to human group dynamics. I don't know how that would even operate. But let's say somehow we could neatly divide the positive and the negative sides of group dynamics. I don't think you could inoculate yourself to the negative side of it. I think what you can do, and what I'm trying to do in the book, is give you the information so that you know why you're acting a particular way, you know why other people are acting a particular way, so that you're aware of the dynamic, which I think is about half of the battle anyway. In terms of what we can do as society, I think that it has more to do with funneling it in a positive direction. So one of the things that I was surprised to learn over the course of researching this book that also comported with everything that I've seen in my life so far is I found a study by Ryan Streeter where people who self-identify as very lonely are also 7 times more likely to be politically active. And so my theory is that as personal communities and third places, quote unquote, places that are neither employers nor houses, Elks Lodge, Rotary Club, whatever, gardening club, is that and religion have declined. Kind of the last man standing has been politics. And so I think there's a lot of very lonely people who are trying to find purpose and community in their lives, and they're settling on politics as the way to do that. And I think
sounds wonderful. What could possibly go wrong there?
God, right? I think politics is the worst substitute religion you could find. I'm an agnostic, and I'm saying this. Like, I would far rather you be Catholic or Meth or Jew, whatever. Or for the
religiously elephant or donkey.
Yes, or for the community element too. Like, it's fine to be passionate about politics. We should be passionate about politics, but there's a difference between arguing about the thing versus the group. Like Thomas Sowell has that great line that there's a difference between being in error versus being in sin. So when you have become deprived of community and purpose, and you end up making politics the replacement for you, then whatever you're arguing about in politics is no longer something quotidian or procedural, which is very much what politics should be, in my opinion. Politics should be very boring and minimal, and it should be, we got to put in the stop sign, where do we put in this, like that kind of stuff. We can have an argument about the stop sign, but we're not having an argument about the soul of the nation. But when politics becomes your tribe, when your primary identity is not, I live in New Hampshire, or I'm a father, or I am a deacon at my church, or I'm really into basketball, whatever the various compendiums, when your thing is I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican, or whatever, and that's the main thing, I think that you run into a real risk of making every fight a kind of proxy holy war, where you and I are arguing about tariffs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, now I can't budge an inch on this if you and I are doing it, because it's I now, if I budge an inch, I'm letting down my tribe. I'm conceding. I'm capitulating my tribe. Whereas I mean, you've worked in state politics before. A lot of the time, you have to make some kind of compromise to get a better thing done. But you can't do that if everything becomes this animated existential battle.
Well, and I know, and I recently wrote. I've only given it out to a few select people, but like I have like a 13 rules for door knocking for like Liberty candidates running for office, and one of the rules I tell people is like, when you knock on a stranger's door and you're a candidate running for office, they are instantly looking to sort you into a category of, is this person on my team or is this person one of those other people, right?
Very much.
And how do you find that issue, that area common ground where you can establish, I'm not your enemy, I'm not in the other tribe, I'm on the same team as you, because then you can have a conversation, and you can even have some disagreements within that conversation.
Yeah.
But the moment you like start arguing with someone or just triggering that like primal, like you're one of those other people, it's like there's no room for.
And I like the word that you used there, primal, because I do think that it's primal. And one of the things I talk about in the book is how accents factor into evolution. So accents they're a feature, not a bug, I guess you could say. Like, they're not random. Like, prior to doing all the research for this, I thought that accents were just a kind of like, random mutation that happens. Australia and America were far enough away eventually it is very much built into us. And the reason for it is that, from what we can tell, most of hominid history was very violent and very dangerous. We are now living in a wonderfully peaceful, affluent time compared to the majority of human history. And so for most of human history, where we're running around the Serengeti with sticks, killing elk, antelope, we're killing antelope. If we crest a hill and we become aware of a group of people down there that also have pointy sticks, it's not like now where it's awesome if we can communicate, because now we can do trade. We can go, where are you from? Oh, great, Germany. We'll give you some cheese for your bratwurst or whatever. That, for most of human history, the presumption was that outsider meant danger. outsider meant enemy tribe who's proactively looking for a tribe to kill. And so what we needed to do is to immediately be able to figure out, are those our guys or are those other guys? And so accents are constantly changing. They're constantly evolving. Languages become mutually unintelligible after about 1,000 years. You go back 1,000 years, you would not be able to understand English. Greek's even older. There's like 5 iterations of Greek. But we're doing it every generation. It's part of why teenagers say weird stuff, because they have an evolutionary impulse to make their own new accent. And it's a shibboleth. It's a way of immediately identifying other tribes. You actually see this in New England and Martha's Vineyard, where they've done studies where a guy went and watched the accents of lobstermen, and he found that right after World War II, weirdly their accents were getting stronger, which flew in the face of all available data, because at the time the thinking was America's becoming less parochial, and we have television and we have radio. So never before have we been less rooted in our local community. We're going to have kind of a melding of accents. And the lobstermen in Martha's Vineyard were actually getting stronger in their accents. So this linguistic theorist went down and studied it. And what he ended up determining was the same period is when Martha's Vineyard transitioned from being a fairly obscure fishing community to a place where people who own boat shoes go to summer. The sorts of people that use the word summer as a verb, they were now going to Martha's Vineyard. They were pricing out the old lobstermen. So the lobstermen, without coordinating it, were intentionally spiking their accent so that they could immediately identify who is the outsider and who is the threat. That's inbuilt in all of us. And you see this throughout communities in the United States. There are other examples where people move to like Minnesota, and you'd have like German immigrants and you'd have Norwegian immigrants, and their accents had become pretty neutral, and then they'd meet each other and they'd spike. And that happens politically. To bring it back to your point, we have the exact same thing with politics. We use coded words that let people know what team we're on, and there are other words that don't. So I'll preface this with, I don't want to teach people how to manipulate other people, but what I do want to teach them to do, and I bring up in the book multiple times, is how to avoid dumb stuff. How do we avoid unnecessary conflict? How do we avoid tripping over unnecessary friction? And accents are a big part of that. Like a really big issue for me that I talk about on my show, The Political Orphanage, a fair amount, is zoning. I think we're really, really overzoned in the United States. I think it's probably the main of the many things. It's the main.
You know, our founder, Jason Sorens, is just as fascinated in the topic of overzoning as you are. I bet the two of you
God bless him.
Have a fascinating conversation
We just
about that.
form an Archon from StarCraft, just merge into one character. It would be advantageous to me, and I'm starting to do this, where if I'm hanging out with Democrat friends and I'm talking about it, I'll say, well, housing justice is very important to me, because this is just how Democrats talk. Whenever they talk about anything, they put the word justice on it. It's housing justice, agricultural justice, whatever policy you're talking about, if you add the word justice to it, it codes as Democrat. And again, I don't want to manipulate anybody, but what I do want to do is unnecessarily avoid dumb stuff, where if I go in and I say, Milton Friedman, we're done. we're already done. I've already tipped the deck on that. And there are code. You find generally, I'll give you another example here. If I say, Eric, I love the outdoors and I'm big on conservation, versus Eric, I love the outdoors and I am a huge environmentalist. Who do you think's the conservative and who do you think's the progressive?
Well, certainly the environmentalist is taken as tribal language for the left, and conservation. I do hear that more on the right, but I don't necessarily know if I guess I would probably label conservation as more of a neutral term, but
probably. I don't know what the conservative version would be. I find that when I talk to conservatives about stuff, they hate poachers.
Yeah.
But I find the word conservation is there. But there are all of these words, and I attempt to document them in the book to some extent.
Or like states' rights versus localism, kind of similar thing, yes. But you go into a
or just say local justice. I can't just say the word justice. States' rights is a really good example of that. Yeah. States' rights is coded as conservative. Other words that tend to be coded as conservative are God-given. Patriot, which ought to be a neutral word, but patriot for whatever reason tends to be more conservative sounding. There are these little things that people are looking to rapidly figure out, are you on my team or are you on the enemy team, and once they've sorted you out, they don't really have anyone to do it. So my thing is keep them guessing, because the goal is to actually have a good conversation rather than just figure out how to have yet another proxy battle of red team versus blue team.
Well, let me ask you about Dunbar's number, because this is one of the more there are many fascinating concepts in the book, but this one stands out. And I couldn't help but think about Dunbar's number and wonder if this is the reason why myself and the entire millennial generation were captured for a decade with fascination by 150 Pokemon.
I love that tweet, by the way. I was like, I wish I thought of this before I wrote the book.
So tell us about Dunbar's number. What is this?
Yeah. Okay. So Dunbar's number. I do this early on in the book. It's the brainchild of Robin Dunbar, who's a British sociologist. He's still around today, and I think that this is absolutely mind-blowing stuff, to the point where I will flush it out completely without even trying to bait people into reading the book. There's much more, but I'll go through this more or less completely, because I think Dunbar's number, to me, explains all issues of scaling everywhere on the planet, both governmentally and in terms of just people being hard-hearted to disasters which occur elsewhere. But the basics are this. Robin Dunbar documented the brain pan size of 300 or so primates, gibbons, gorillas, bonobos, everything, 300 or so of those. Then he came up with the maximum troop size of all of those primates. So, for example, orangutans are pretty solitary. They hang out in one or two. Gorillas is like 60. Chimps is like usually 100. Can get up to 200, but usually it's 200. So it's correlated to brain pan size. It's not the same for all primates. They vary. Gibbons can have like 12. I don't know. There's some maximum number, at which point the size of the group has got too big for interpersonal dynamics to work anymore. The primates can no longer process the size of the group. They can only understand 8 other gibbons as being gibbons at any one time. And if the number gets up to 12, then they will split in half, or they'll kill a couple, or they'll run off a couple of males or something. But there's a stable number that they can have a group homeostasis at. And if it exceeds that number, it becomes unstable. So he developed this. He took all of those numbers and he came up with an algorithm. Give me the brain pan size of the primate, and I will tell you what the stable group number is of that primate. Then he took the average brain pan size for Homo sapiens, us human beings, and he came up with 150. 150 is the root cellular size of a human group. Clearly, we can have a bigger society than 150 people. There's more than 150 people in New Hampshire. There's more than 150 people in Denmark. Clearly, we could do that. However, 150 is kind of the natural group size of human beings that we naturally have. And 150 is about how many people you can understand as individuals at any given time. After that, they become abstractions. So we are designed to live in groups of people that are up to about 150. And for most of human civilization, or for most of human history, we were probably living in groups where we all knew each other one-on-one. I knew every single person. Once you get past 150, you've got what I call the name tag barrier. After 150, you start needing name tags, and that changes the dynamic of how the society is going to operate.
Yeah, and once they expanded Pokemon beyond 150, middle school Eric Brakey was like, I can't keep up with all these. These new Pokemon name tags, I lost interest.
Right. Well, that actually makes a lot of sense to me, because 150 and under, your brain, I mean, we're stepping out of my expertise here, but presumably your brain could have 150 slots for that. Once you got over 150, some of them were becoming abstractions. You need reference tools. So on a governmental side, what that means is that you could probably have kind of any government you want with 150 people or less, because ultimately you could sort everything out around a campfire. You could have a communist or socialist commune and go, Eric, you've not been doing your job. We're all going to call you out on it.
So would you say that this is one of the fundamental things that communism tends to miss, is that you could theoretically make this work in a small group of under 150, but you scale beyond that and
100%, yes.
Yeah.
I think, well, I think a couple of things. I mean, the other thing that I think you and your audience will agree with is that when you talk to the communists, they talk a real good game, and then you go, great, and I could opt out, right? Like if your society went tits up, I could go, and they're like, no, we would shoot you. We want to do all this stuff. We will kill you if you don't. And you're like, this seems like it. I think the coercion's a really big part of that. But I think the other thing too is that scaling I think is a pretty big issue. So for example, I went to a hippie commune in Scotland this summer. I went up to Findhorn, which is the Findhorn Spiritual Eco Village. Very granola hippie, like hanging out in hot tubs, talking about spirit animals and stuff. And they've got a little newspaper in their community, and they've got a category in it of the Abundance Fund or something. I don't remember what they call it, but the idea is, hey, everybody puts money into a pot every month for the Abundance Fund, and if you need it, no questions asked, just come get the money. It's to help it. And that, I think, can work pretty well when you've got a small community of people that all really care about each other, because these are my neighbors, I know them all personally. If I am abusing the system, I am abusing people that I care about. And so there's kind of a natural mechanism in place to stop you from being a freeloader. Can you imagine how disastrous that would be at a national level if you went, hey, everybody, every year you're going to put $1,000 into taxes, and it's going to go into a general if you need it fund. No questions asked, just come get money out of the general if you need it fund. Everyone in the country would do it. I mean, the scaling is a really big issue, and I think yes, with communism, I would call it much before that, Eric. I think that it's also one of the main reasons that we've got a lot of governmental problems in the United States. Is I'm increasingly skeptical that you can have a big national government this big. I think you can probably have a very weak federated system, but I don't think it's going to work super well when you get up to a really large level. But the other element too, from a tribalistic standpoint, is that you end up having to come up with workarounds to get past Dunbar's number. Clearly you can have a society of more than 150 people, but they're weak connections. They're not they're not the connections that you've got with your family or your church or your neighbors. They're abstractions, which are inherently more weak. And so you can get around that by coming up with kind of national myths. We both speak English, or we both love the Patriots, whatever. We as human beings, we're really good at.
Or what I keep thinking about is I remember 12 years ago working on the Ron Paul campaign. If I went anywhere in the country and I bumped into someone, I didn't know anything about them, and and we learned, oh, you're a Ron Paul supporter too.
Yeah.
It's like instant kinship, right?
Yep.
What is that?
Right, and so that's part of it, is that human beings, as I think is an evolutionary mechanism, is we come up with social constructs as a way to replicate kinship, artificial kinship, of going, okay, you and I aren't related, but kind of we're related because we both like liberty, and I was about to say we're both bearded guys, but
I don't know what you did to your beard.
When I was in Scotland, a 20-year-old told me I looked good for 50, and I was like, well, time to shave. I'm only 40, by the way.
I'm just in the process of growing my beard back, by the way. So
you look good with a beard. You're a good bearded guy. You should definitely keep your beard. So that's part of it, is there's artificial kinship networks that come from social constructs. But the other really, really sound mechanism to get these communities to come together is to have an existential threat. So as apes, as primates, it takes a while to build strong relationships. And as human beings, you really build relationships two ways. You either spend a lot of time together, or you bond through some sort of shared travail. You go to a ropes course, or you're stuck in an elevator or something, right? Those are kind of the two, but it takes either stress or it takes time. Those are the two methods by which to bond. And one of the kind of loopholes that exists in us structurally as human beings is that if you and I don't know each other, we're not fighting, but we don't know each other. We're just in a field, we're in a park, never met you before in my life, and a tiger comes up over the hill, and there's now an existential threat to us. We will just kind of snap immediately and go, I trust you 100% until this conflict is dealt with. I'm awarding you, all within a split second, I am awarding you brother status until this threat has been deterred. And that happens when we're getting invaded. If Babylonians are cresting the hill, I'll go, nuts, Babylonians. Okay, we're both Sumerians. Let's just assume that we trust each other 100%. And this is something that politicians have figured out, is that it's kind of difficult to get Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians or whoever to really put their shoulder into it just for the sake of doing a good thing. It's a lot easier when they go, these other people are going to destroy you and your way of life. And so they're constantly rattling that change to manipulate you, to get you to do their bidding.
So the Greeks are all warring city-states until the Persians show up.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and then they're willing to do. There's that old saw of me against my brother and I against my cousin and I against the world. There is this kind of scaling issue there too. But the main thing is that when you can create an existential threat, it's a very good motivator for getting people solid. And I think you see this in American politics all the time. We've got a war on drugs. We've got a war on terror. Everything becomes a kind of war. Everything becomes a mobilization effort because there has to be this external threat. And I don't like it. I think it's manipulative, and people should be making the case to positively get together and cooperate as opposed to have to respond to some evil external circumstance.
Well, certainly I'm glad that we respond in that fashion when there is a legitimate existential threat.
Sure.
But of course, it does seem more often than not it's an invented existential threat that's, fear is the mind killer, as they say, to get us all to march the mind together.
I think you guys have a lot of that positive stuff, though. So, the 2 times that I've been to New Hampshire, I've hung out with the Free State Project. People will go hey, if you move here, we'll help you move in. That to me is more of hey, we just if you all won tomorrow, New Hampshire secedes from the Union, it's its own libertarian paradise. I don't really think you all would go, well, that's it. Never going to see you again. You seem to have built kind of a proactive, positive. A lot of it is oppositional. A lot of it is adversarial to the state or to Democrats,
Certainly.
Republicans, whatever. But when you're helping people move in, I don't think that's a fear-based response. I think that's a very positive tribal group thing to do, to form proactive community.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think there's a sense of the world is going to do whatever the world does. We just want to come here and build community with each other and have the kind of community we want to have. But okay, so we all have we're all in tribes, whether we recognize it or not. We have groups that we can recognize or unconsciously kind of have as our kind of tribal groups. In your book, you also talk about methods that people attain status within those tribal groups, and can you talk a little bit more about that? Everyone's always jockeying for status within their tribe. How do people go about doing it?
Yeah. So one of the things I keep coming back to in the book is I'm pretty sure we're apes. There's this long-standing idea that human beings we're kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi with a body dangling beneath us, and it's nope. We're working with pretty old, archaic caveman meat hardware. And some of the stuff that's really important to us being cavemen, and we're identical to cavemen in every way, shape, and form that's genetic, is it's really important to us that we promote our group. It's very, again, it's that whole, I got to go root for the football team. It's very important to us to have a group and root for it. It's also very important to us to avoid censure in the group and to have status within the group. And when you kind of drill down into it, how do I obtain status? There's really only 3 routes to obtain status in any hierarchy of people. You can do it through dominance, by bullying people. You're at the bar, the biker bar or whatever, and you're the big bad dude that can knock people around, and therefore you're given respect out of threat of violence. I think it could be more subtle than that, and a lot of the time is online, on Twitter and on Facebook. I think a lot of the time when people are correcting folks on you're not allowed to say that, not all the time, but a lot of the time, that word is verboten. That's not something you can say. I think that is a dominance display where what the person's really doing is signaling to people around them, to the person they're talking to, but also signaling around them, I have sufficient clout to be able to issue orders to subordinates, and therefore I am high up in the totem pole. A couple other ways you can do it are you can do it through prestige. Prestige by just I am aristocratic in some capacity. I come from a good family, or I've got a good college degree, or ideally I have accomplished something. And this kind of comes from an evolutionary thing where previously, you beat the hell out of the other apes, you became the top ape. That's how gorilla harems work. But also, as cavemen, you lug back an elk and you brought an elk to the tribe, we all go, wow, he's really good at killing elk. We need that protein. We respect him because he's doing this thing for the tribe. So we've got dominance, we've got prestige so far, we've got dominance and success, we can say. And then there's a third thing, which is moral purity. So we're living in the tribe on the Serengeti 300,000 years ago. I'm not a really big dude. I can't push anybody around. And I'm not particularly good at killing elk either. But here's what I am good at. I'm good at just behavior that's socially beneficial for the tribe. I remember the sacred stories of our tribe, which is good for our cohesion. I'm emphatically in favor of defending our tribe. I'm really, really good about enforcing our rules, of spotting people that are outside of the tribal norms, things that are good for promoting internal concord. What's the opposite of discord? Cohesion. Yeah, so that's kind of where that moral purity comes from. Is, well, I deserve status because I am an exemplar of our values, and that will ultimately help the tribe. And I think that this is the other part of what's going on the internet a lot. Is I think that Twitter is maybe 80% people that are status deprived, that are trying to assure themselves that they're high status. And they're doing it by either trying to defeat each other in online arguments, which I think is an absurd waste of time, or they're preening. And you could some examples of this would be like, I'm from Oklahoma. I grew up in very religious communities, and there are people that will maybe talk more about how often they go to Bible study than they should, or really let you know how often they pray. And what they're doing is they're giving you a virtue display. They're virtue signaling, a term that I think everybody's familiar with. The progressive variant of that might be talking about how much I recycle, or I am carbon neutral, or I know that you say people of color, and then when you say colored people, Eric, I am going to slap you down, which is a dominance display. And by the way, everybody's doing this all the time, constantly.
I'm sure that there are both like healthy and toxic ways to go about all three. You know, I was thinking about it as I was reading here. Let me grab one thing. So I was thinking about kind of like in libertarian circles, like how I unconsciously do these things, right? And of course, I know that like in libertarian circles, like this like the thing, right? There's only one true libertarian in the world. It's always the person who is themselves kind of, right, determining what the calculation is. They're the only true libertarian. And so you see always these kind of spirals online of like, you're not a real libertarian because you have this kind of divergent thing. And this seems like kind of the moral purity way of kind of gaining status. And if I'm honest with myself, I know that over the course of, particularly when I was younger and kind of newer and learning these concepts and didn't have much to like show for like accomplishments, I think I went about this a lot more. Right. These days I got like this pen to wave around, which is the pen that signed constitutional carry into law in the state of Maine. Right. So I can say I've got this sign of my prestige, of accomplishments that I brought back to my libertarian tribe, and maybe I feel less pressure to try to play these moral purity games with people.
100%. And my work is informed very significantly by a book called The Status Game by Will Storey. I want to give him credit on this. Will Storey would say, and I concur, status games are not something that the odd person is afflicted by. We're all doing it constantly. I'm wearing this snappy vest. Presumably on some level, I'm trying to communicate prestige to people, that I'm the kind of guy that has lapels on his vest, therefore I'm prestigious. Perfect example of when you don't have accomplishments, you go for a purity play. I do that on my show. So like I host the Political Orphanage. I make a full-time living at it, pretty good, but I'm not a household name. And so like when we start talking about Joe Rogan or Eric Brakey or the other great luminaries that are dominating the podcasting landscape, I can go, well, they sold out to advertisers or political media specifically. What I literally do is go, they're partisan hacks. I'm above that. That's why I don't have a big audience, is because I am too pure. I mean, we're all doing it. I think the trick there too is that what we want to do ideally is shape a society that rewards success rather than purity. If you are a morally pure person, that's great, but it can become a kind of last resort for people that can't compete on anything else. Where with libertarians, I am the most libertarian of the libertarians. And okay, at some point we ought to get some stuff done. And I would rather if you come up with a cure for cancer, we should give you status in our society. If you come up with a fusion generator or something, we should. I would rather us weight the status that we give for that. And for a lot of the other stuff, I think going back to the earlier supposition that communities atrophied, I think that there's a lot of very lonely people that are adrift without purpose, and they end up going on to politics, and then politics becomes a moral purity play for them because maybe their career's not going great, so they're the most Democrat or the most Republican or whatever. Like, wouldn't it be so much better if you just got good at guitar? If that became the thing, that you're like, I like karaoke. I'm never going to be a professional singer, but I'm pretty good at karaoke. And there are ways that you could obtain. You could be a bricklayer, but be really good at karaoke and have that sense of that coming there. Again, I think like politics becomes this kind of black hole of all the other deficits in our life, and it really is the worst place to be seeking meaning in life, I think.
Well, we are. We're going to be running out of time shortly, but there's one more thing I want to ask you about before we run out of time completely. One of the things I've appreciated, Andrew, as a longtime listener of your podcasts, and both the Political Orphanage and Alienating the Audience, your sci-fi podcast, and now you do this other podcast with two other folks, We're Not Wrong. I'm sure you've got a million more podcasts I don't even know about. You always seem
This is what you do if you don't have kids. You panic and try to distribute your memes instead of genes.
But I remember you did a podcast on just kind of the different regions around the country and how they're kind of like, in fact, different nations kind of within. And you spent a lot of time on New England and in particular kind of, and you did in your book too, you talk about kind of the dueling civic religions that we're currently facing right now, kind of the civic religion that I think maybe a lot of us identify with, which I would say encompasses people who might consider themselves liberal as well as conservatives and libertarians of this idea of the progression of liberty and the promise of America versus this woke kind of civic religion that's come about where this whole promise of liberty is a lie. It's all based on power struggle and oppressor and oppressive. And you've specifically talked about kind of how, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like the Puritanism, the puritanical nature of kind of the wokeness coming out of New England is a particularly obnoxious strain.
You're not putting any words in my mouth. I said all these things. It is obnoxious and puritanical. I'll get flack from people because I'll bring up John Calvin and I'll get like a 15-page like Calvin thought people were great. You're okay. I'm not going to get into that specifically. So on the note of religion, like going back to what we talked about earlier with social constructs being a way for people to create artificial kinship networks. From an evolutionary standpoint, I'm not making any cosmic pronouncements about the certitude of anybody's religion. I'm not talking about whether or not God exists or anything like that. I'm just talking about the anthropological mechanisms here. Religion is another example of that, where we come up with all sorts of different beliefs that unite us, that allow us to become brothers and sisters. It's not, to me, surprising at all that religions tend to have familial designations like Father Ted or Brother Cornell or whatever. And I would say we tend to put religion on it in the United States if it's tax deductible or if it's tax exempt. It's a very special thing, but the belief systems are not that neatly organized. Like I would say in the United States, we have a religious belief in Hollywood that it is your job to find the one, and they will complete you. And there's lots of people that believe that there's one person out there, and that they, if you just find this person, that is, then your whole life will be great. And it can overlap with your official religion. It can overlap with whether you're Methodist or Buddhist or whatever. And in Asia, this happens a lot more. We've got overlapping religions. So we have a kind of civic religion in the United States that is functionally a religion. It's not mutually exclusive. And that older civic religion is that America was started by a group of plucky underdogs that were able to fight a dominant power and remake the order based on liberty and equality before the law and opportunity. And it's a pretty good place and a pretty good system. And It's we've now gone off in the world to kill Nazis and go to the moon. And that was kind of a predominant, largely shared civic religion in the United States. I think it's still the predominant one amongst liberals and Democrats, too. Most polling, when you ask Democrats, like, is America good? The majority of them are like, of course. It's just the kind of mouthy ones you see on MSNBC that get all the oxygen in the room, but they're not emblematic of the Democratic Party as a whole. You do see this displacement of that, I think, where there's a kind of competing religion that goes, well, no, America's always been bad, and it's sort of fundamentally horrible, and I think there's a lot of puritanical overlap with that. My interpretation of Puritanism, this is where I start getting the emails from the John Calvinist apologist. I look at Puritanism and think Puritanism is kind of an anti-human philosophy in many ways. Just human beings are fundamentally crappy. Human beings deserve to go to hell. We're bad, we're sinful, we're awful. And we deserve the absolute worst. But if we believe the right things through grace, we can be saved. But we don't deserve it at all. And I see, like, I think...
But at least in Christianity, there is a path to redemption.
There is a path, yeah.
There is not.
No, and like, I think you see this with a lot of what I'm not going to call it environmentalism. I'm going to call it ecotism. I'm an environmentalist. I like the environment. I do things to protect it. But I'm not an ecotist. It's not like a religion for me, but there are a lot of people for whom you hear these same things. Human beings are awful. We used to live in homeostasis with the environment, and then greed corrupted us, and now we have to tighten the belt, and it becomes this kind of anti-humanist philosophy. So I think wokeness is much the same, where there's these taboo words, there's heresy, there's blasphemy. There are things they're straight up religious that are there. They're not. These are. They get mad when I say that because they generally think they're too smart for religion. But I'm going, look, I'm telling you, as an agnostic, you're practicing a religion. You just have different gods.
There's so much I'd love to talk about. We are running out of time. I'm going to give you the last word. Where can people get the book? Where can people follow your podcasts? And let us know the next time everyone can come say hello when you come visit New Hampshire, maybe at the Liberty Forum or PorcFest.
We will make that happen one of these days. Let me ask real quick, when's the episode going to come out since we're coming up on the election?
Wednesday at 7. So we're recording it Tuesday. It'll be out Wednesday or tomorrow night.
Great. So I'll make 2 quick pitches. Regardless whether you buy the book or not, check out The Political Orphanage. That's my long-running podcast. The week of the election, I am putting together a Broadway musical. It will probably be called Donald Trump the Musical, but I'm doing a full hour-long Broadway musical that's going to be, I think, the funniest thing I've ever made, certainly the most irreverent and offensive thing I've ever made. It will piss off a lot of people. If you're the kind of person that's not easily offended, you'll find it very funny. And then go through the back catalog, because a lot of the show is stuff that Eric and I have talked about. For the book specifically, the book is called Tribalism is Dumb, and my promise to you is this. I think it's like $15. Politics will be a little less baffling and irritating to you by the time you finish the book. It will make more sense. I'm not going to tell you can fix it. I'm not telling you can change people's minds. What I can tell you is that when your friends that are trapped in dogmatic partisan mindsets are irritating you, you will understand why better. You will understand how to deal with them better. And the whole political world will just be a little bit more lubricated and less irritating to you. I think it's worth the investment. Tribalism is dumb. And
I will say, I hopefully he doesn't watch this show, but I think I'm planning to give it as a Christmas gift to my father-in-law. I think he would really enjoy it. So hopefully he doesn't watch, and so he will still be surprised. But anyway, it could be a great Christmas gift for your loved ones who get frustrated with all the tribalism they experience on social media in politics. Well, Andrew, and I know you're just starting a new job at Reason. We could talk about all that. But anyway, congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'll come back anytime. I like talking to you, Eric. This is how we hang out.
Love talking with you. And all right, we got to wrap up. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's the show. Real quick, of course, as always, go to fsp.org. Check out our events calendar for free state events happening pretty much every single day, including, as I mentioned, Robbie the Fire Bernstein at the Shell this weekend. And while you're there, make a donation at fsp.org. Your donation will be matched dollar for dollar. Thank you to our producer, Renita. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.